Ladies and gentlemen, could I request you guys to please take a seat as we have a very insightful panel and some really top-notch experts. And it'll be great to have a very first understand and see their presentations, and then have an interactive dialogue on this very important topic of Islamic economics and collective responsibility, unified goals for a shared planet. I've been part of the SDG movements and ESG transitions, and at the same time, we've been exploring the Sharia principles of goodness and kindness and financial frameworks as well. And there are so many similarities, as Dino mentioned in his speech as well. So this discussion, personally for me, is very, very interesting because we've got three very interesting perspectives from three different parts of the world and subject matter experts. So forgive me in advance because I would ask some out-of-the-box questions, so I hope you guys would not mind. Now, allow me to introduce our esteemed panel. We have got Professor Paolo Pietro Biancone. He's a full professor of business administration and Islamic finance, University of Turin, Italy. Professor Paolo is a chartered accountant, an auditor, freelance journalist, and an author of numerous accounting and social entrepreneurship publications. He's the editor-in-chief of the European Journal of Islamic Finance and European Journal of Social Impact and Circular Economy. Then we have the Associate Professor, Dr. Ziyaad Mahomed, lead researcher, Center of Islamic Social Finance at International Center for Education in Islamic Finance University. Dr. Ziyaad is the head of online program at INCEIF University. He is currently a visiting fellow at the Oxford Center for Islamic Center. He has advised financial institutions and regulators in Islamic finance, regulation, social finance, fintech, and sustainability for almost 25 years in more than 20 countries, and has instructed over 12,000 trainees. Last but not the least, we have got Mr. Omar Shaikh, Managing Director, Global Ethical Finance Initiative. He's also a chartered accountant by profession. Having worked in audit and private equity, he specializes in ESG, sustainable and responsible finance, and has spearheaded a number of sector development initiatives since 2008. Mr. Omar has advised numerous financial institutions across London, GCC, and Africa, and has been appointed by governments and regulators to advise on the enabling policy and regulatory frameworks for Islamic finance. We'll have a lot of fun, ladies and gentlemen. Could I request, so the format would be that we would have 10 minutes each for the presentations, then we would have some question-answer sessions, and then we'll open it to the floor to ask some really tough questions. So guys, you've got to listen, you have got to kind of ask, because the idea is deliberation. Idea is making sure that tough questions are asked, and we create a progressive dialogue for mutual understanding. So for me, you are my partner in crime right now. So please, your attention and your questions will be very much appreciated. So I would like to invite Professor Paolo for his first presentation.
Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and distinguished colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank the Scientific and Organizing Committee for inviting me. Today, we are here with a shared purpose to explore how Islamic finance principle can align with the environmental, social, and governance criteria, and how together they can create a sustainable, fair, and ethical financial future. As the world faces climate change, inequality, and governance failure, ESG has become a framework to drive responsible investment. ESG goes behind profit. It incorporates the impact of our financial decision on the environment, society, and government structure. What is fascinating is the natural alignment of this principle with the ethical foundation of Islamic finance. Islamic finance grounded in principles like risk sharing, prohibition of interest, and avoiding harmful activities, is deeply committed to fairness, justice, and environmental stewardship. Islamic finance instruments promote transparency and social justice, align closely with ESG goals, and contribute to broader global sustainable effort, particularly the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The global financial landscape is undergoing significant transformation with an increasing focus on sustainable and responsible investment. Islamic finance, with its core principle, including risk sharing, prohibition of harmful activities, and commitment to social justice, provide a robust framework for integrating the practice into broader financial markets. Therefore, we start initial research on the inherent compatibility of Islamic finance with ESG framework. So the research question under investigation that we did with my research group are, first of all, how do Islamic finance principles align with ESG and contribute to SDGs? The second, what themes and trends exist in the literature on Islamic finance and SDGs integration? And the third, what challenges and opportunity exist for Islamic finance in adopting ESG, particularly financial inclusion? As methodology, using a systematical literature review as our methodology framework, we truly explored academic research and the intersection of Islamic finance and ESG principles. This approach, complemented by bibliometric and content analysis, allows to synthesize existing studies and trends, ensuring a comprehensive understanding of global development in this emerging area. We define clear boundaries to limit the scope of paper, including focusing on sources that discuss the integration of Islamic finance with the sustainability objective. The journals were carefully selected to ensure our research was drawn from authoritative sources. By identifying critical theme areas such as green sukuk and WOC, we were able to map the role these instruments play in achieving sustainable development goals like climate change mitigation and financial inclusion. The literature was then classified into thematic taxonomy, and detailed thematic analysis was conducted, highlighted trend and gap in the research landscape. What about the results? On the critical finding of our research, apart from the descriptive elements, is the increasing of publication sources and number of papers published in several parts of the world, as you can see in this PowerPoint. Our results start demonstrating alignment between Islamic finance instrument and the ESG criteria. For instance, factorial analysis reveals that green sukuk represent a growing interest in financing eco-friendly projects that align with global sustainability goals. Green sukuk has emerged in our cluster number 1 as a vital tool for funding environmental sustainable projects, particularly in sectors like renewable energy, infrastructure, and climate change mitigation. This instrument, compliant with Sharia law, allows investors to contribute to eco-friendly initiatives while adhering to the ethical value of Islamic finance. This intersection presents new opportunity for Islamic finance to lead the sustainable finance. Incorporating the findings from our thematic analysis as described in the emerging theme map, we observe that specific themes have become a central driver in the development of Islamic finance and ESG integration. Motor themes such as ethical finance, financial inclusion, and fintech exhibit strong relevance and development in this area. These themes are at the forefront of aligning Islamic finance with sustainability goals and demonstrate the sector's capacity to lead sustainable development initiatives. On the other hand, niche themes like environmental sustainability and Islamic microfinance are gaining traction, though they are still emerging in terms of density. This area holds promise for future development, but require further research and regulatory support to reach their full potential. Basic themes such as green sukuk and sustainability form the foundation of Islamic finance contribution to ESG, reflecting the inherent comparability between Sharia principle and sustainable investment strategy. As you can see, the role of Waqf Islamic endowment is expanding today financial landscape. Traditionally used to fund the social welfare project, modern Waqf models are being adapted to address crucial challenges such as poverty alleviation and educational access, further integrating Islamic principle with global sustainability objectives. Moreover, fintech innovations such as blockchain and smart contract are transforming Islamic financial institution operation, improving transparency, efficiency, and economic inclusion. This innovation opens up new opportunities to address the financial needs of underserved population while ensuring compliance with Islamic ethical standards. Furthermore, our study highlights several challenges such as scalability and the need for enhanced regulatory framework to support broader ESG adoption within Islamic finance. Addressing these challenges is crucial for effectively integrating Islamic finance principles with global sustainability effort. One exciting avenue for overcoming these challenges is increasing collaboration between Islamic and conventional financial institutions. By developing the ESG-compliant product together, we can harness the strength of both systems, combining Islamic finance ethical focus with conventional finance global reach. As we embark on this journey together, I encourage you to take full advantage of this opportunity to exchange ideas, share insight, and collaborating on solutions. Let us not forget that finance is not merely about economic growth, it's about social justice, environmental protection, and creating a better future for future generations. In conclusion, Islamic finance aligns strongly with the ESG, contributing to the SDG agenda much more than conventional finance. It's trying to move its asset in more sustainable practice. This represents a significant opportunity at the same time challenges for Islamic financial institutions to adopting the ESG. I just want to add one thing that I came from the University of Turin and we are in a non-Muslim country, so I think that all the suggestions that you can provide me to develop in a better way Islamic finance also in Italy, that is a very tough situation, is welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Paolo. This is very insightful. It clearly demonstrates that there is a very strong alignment with Islamic finance and Islamic mechanisms and the ESG and way forward. I have a number of questions on that, but before I actually get into that, I would like to invite Professor Ziyaad Mohammed, and he would share his paper titled The History of Islamic Economic Revelation and Practice, an Extended Experience. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala sayyidil mursaleen, Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een, amma ba'd. اللهم افتح علينا بحكمتك وانشر علينا برحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. Certainly, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here at the AlBaraka Forum. I joined AlBaraka Bank, by the way, back in 2003. as a vice president of marketing and product development, so it brings back a lot of memories as to the actual impetus of AlBaraka in shaping Islamic socio-economic thought. And when we look at what we're going to talk about today briefly, I've just been given 10 minutes to talk about 1400 years of Islamic economic evolution. As Omar reminded me this morning, that's 140 years every 60 seconds. So just hold on to your seats. I'm going to try to move through this and really talk about the highlights of the value contributions rather than each century or each thinker's contributions. We'll talk about the historical development of Islamic finance and banking as well, because that forms part of the entire session of Islamic economics. And then finally, impacts and lessons and where we are today. Now, things that we already know are that major disruption that revelation caused in pre-Islamic Arabia. Suddenly, there is this talk about a moral economy, social justice, the issue of values integrated within the economic system, fair market practice, and even giving women rights. And this was really something very strange for the people at the time. And if you can see the number of verses just revealed around granting women rights. Women were inherited. Now they could inherit. This changed the dynamic of an Islamic economic system because you were no longer trying to clap with one hand. You were actually able to clap with both hands. This is an important disruption and contribution of Islam to modern society. Now, ultimately, establishment of a framework of justice, equity, and ethical behavior. We hear that all the time. These verses, the Sunnah, the Hadith, the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ were very specific and pragmatic in the way they started to shape the economy for the next 1400 years. Ultimately, the focus was on social protection, it was on human progress and societal harmony. That was the focus. And bear in mind that all of this harmony was designed within a pluralistic system. It wasn't that Muslims would be dealt with one law and people of other faith could do whatever they'd like to, or Muslims could do whatever they would like to when it came to economics and trade to people of other faiths. No, it applied to everyone, and fair market practice became the norm. Just an idea of the area in which the Quran and the Hadith covered when it comes to revelation and implementation. Now, where we saw a significant change was the marketplace. Because this way of life, this new religion as they saw it, was not limited to the home, it was not limited to places of worship, but it was integrated within the marketplace. It was within the very DNA of societal growth. And here the Medina market principles laid a very clear foundation that this is a mixed market. Market forces were allowed to operate freely, but within Sharia parameters. There were restrictions. It wasn't a complete laissez-faire free market as we understand it. There were actually guardrails, so to speak. There were abolishments to any barriers to entry. Anyone had opportunity to play in the market. Entrepreneurship was encouraged. Unfair practice was banned, and of course, at that time, market taxes were repealed, and this was really a dominating feature of other markets, and it restricted the growth of other markets. Now, if we fast forward to the contemporary practice, we can see that we still use regulatory frameworks. The hisbah mechanism of the debit credit is still in practice. The concept of the waqf system, the endowments, have been evolved into trusts and endowment law in various countries, but still exist as waqf law in some countries. And they've gone through a cycle of progress and a bit of decline over the last 100 years. And now there seems to be a bit of a revival once again when it comes to social finance, in particular waqf. The concepts of social justice, equitable distribution of wealth, and ethical business practices are things that we echo all the time in the way we do things. But when it comes to pragmatism, that's a different game altogether. We're still looking at bottom line. We're still looking at self-interest, and that balance is not there as yet. We are in a world of predatory capitalism.
Agreed.
And until we move into a societal harmony that's focused on mutual benefit, then we would not have learned from the principles of the past, Islamic economic principles included. Snapshot of some of the great thinkers of the Abbasid period: Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal, Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, contributing to the issues of property and what constitutes materiality, something very unique. Imam Abu Yusuf is talking about rural development projects and the importance of food security, something that we talk about today. Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal is talking about market competition. He's talking about freedom of contract and development of enterprise. Ibn Hazm, the famous scholar, talking about removal of poverty, or at least alleviation of poverty. And that's another debate, eradication versus alleviation. It's a huge debate. But he's talking about self-cultivation and, again, sharecropping for the purpose of food security. Now, Imam Ghazali, if we start talking about that, we're going to spend weeks, because his contribution to modern Islamic thought is just immense. And just one or two highlights here. He talked about unlawful revenue sources and advocated for very halal approaches to how a government is expected to raise its funds. But he allowed public borrowing as well for the growth and development of economies. And we know that he's influenced Western thought all the way from Adam Smith to St. Thomas Aquinas and others. The Golden Age moved on, and as you can see, we've talked a lot about agricultural development that continued. The SAC was introduced, yes, 1,000 years ago. The sukuk, the Islamic bond that we talk about today, and the modern check that we apply, flourishing trade and commerce. But I want to point out Al-Maqrizi's contribution here. Al-Maqrizi said, if you were to only utilize a gold standard, bear in mind I'm condensing a lot of information, the gold standard may lead to the issue of good money being driven out by bad money. This is Gresham's law, as we know it. So another major contribution. Ibn Khaldun comes in. And Ibn Khaldun says, well, I have this social idea, this asabiyya concept. And this concept of solidarity means that a collectivist approach is the only way we can progress. And if you want to see that in practice, you've got to outline 8 principles, and each one connected closely. The sovereign strength comes from the Sharia, and that goes on and strengthens the people. In order for people to be strong, they need wealth, and wealth is driven through development. Development must have justice, and justice is the criterion that Allah sets upon mankind, and it's the sovereign's responsibility and the public's responsibility to then understand and integrate that justice. The Ottomans, and we only have 45 seconds left. And you can see that the Ottomans have done a huge contribution to civilization when it comes to state-owned enterprises. The Waqf foundation again developed further, and then the expansion and institutionalization. Islamic finance being now relegated to 30 seconds. And as you know, it's developed quite substantially, but like in the UK and many other countries, there's a lot of criticism around Islamic finance. The fact that it has not fulfilled its dynamics, it focuses on form and not substance, it focuses on debt and not equity, it focuses on mimicking instead of leading, but it has contributed to $4 trillion worth of economy. It has achieved social capital and created thousands of jobs. It has advanced Sharia thinking and decision-making to a level never thought of before. But social impact, and you can see that it was discussed even earlier, and our respected professors also talked about the impact of social development. And here we know Akhuwat and its major contribution. We know about the Malaysian zakat contribution in Kenya, where $1.2 million of zakat turns into $20 million of output. This is something that can be replicated. And then we talk about Baznas and finally social impact. And I'm going to close with this, if you permit me. They said 10 to 12 minutes, so I'm taking advantage of that last minute. Balanced Islamic finance ecosystem, and that's what we require. Right now, we've got these little offshoots of how we can do Islamic banking, why we need socio-economic justice and social finance. We drive towards Maqasid and the Tayyib initiative, but an Islamic finance ecosystem is not really prevalent except for countries like Malaysia, perhaps a bit of Indonesia, and a little bit in the Middle East. But they have been rather in silos, and therefore they lend themselves to a lot of criticism. When it comes to the UK, I don't see much of that integration or real ecosystem at all. It seems to be rather fragmented, effective in its fragments, but when it comes to a whole, the collectivist approach will be a lot more effective. The moral economy, we need to go back to values and looking at behavior, and that's what drove the success of past Islamic economies, not pure regulation, not just rules. There must be an internalization of good values and principles that are spiritually driven through taqwa. And once that is there, then you will see Islamic economic growth and prospects. Finally, human capital development, knowledge. Without knowledge and literacy, we're going to be shooting in the dark. And we're going to criticize and insult on things we don't really understand because we view it in a very myopic way. We need that literacy. We need to increase that knowledge. And any knowledge is not going to be worth it. Only beneficial knowledge that's going to be coupled with a clear, sincere objective to obtaining and attaining a socio-economic dynamic that's really going to uplift the globe, everyone, the community, the global community, Muslim, non-Muslim, the environment, sustainability, social responsibility. It has to be a collectivist approach. I'm going to end there. Thank you very much. And now I've gone past my time.
Very good, very, very good.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was, I mean, you're absolutely right. Time is a currency, and this was a stark reminder that although the context and the substance of conversation is so solid, but I have questions. I am really yearning to but I would let Omar to carry on with his 10 minutes and on global synergy, crafting the fair and Islamic sustainable economy together. And then there are a few questions for my esteemed panel. It's not questioning, it's asking question to understand. So, and I would urge my wonderful crime and partner, the audience as well, to think about the questions we can potentially ask. Omar, over to you.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, speakers, participants, good morning. Pleasure to be here, and I'd like to first commend AlBaraka Banking Group and the foundation for this summit. I think the work of His Excellency Yusuf and Ibrahim and all the team is spectacular. Very simply, I'm not an economist, I'm not a theologian, I'm not a professor. I come to add some reflections as a practitioner. My work is in the mainstream sustainable finance space, where I've been operating. GEFI's been based, we're headquartered up in Edinburgh, and we've been doing a lot of work building out the ecosystem for mainstream sustainable finance. By background, I was also been involved in Islamic finance as well. And over the last few years, we've done a lot of work launching the Global Islamic Finance and UN SDGs Task Force, which has looked at the exact overlaps between the SDGs and Islamic finance. As you were mentioning, Professor, with the UK government and Islamic Development Bank, we launched that at Glasgow COP, and the high-level working group on Green Sukuk and Project Tayyib as well. So I'll touch on some of those factors. So how does all of this great thinking, all this great philosophy, all this great economic principles, how does it actually play out on the street? What is the reality of what we see? First of all, sustainability, a new funky buzzword. Everyone all of a sudden is a sustainability expert. I think we've got 100 of them in the room, which is fantastic. But the question is, how did we get here? Why does sustainability matter all of a sudden? Well, I'd like to proffer two reasons. Number one is the climate crisis. After everyone spent a lot of time denying it, funded by the oil majors, we've now realized, well, you can't deny it. And number two is the global financial crisis, which plunged the world into austerity, this country as well. But of course, prior to that, we've had the Chicago academics, we've had many others talking about ESG and sustainability. And right here in the city in the late 90s, when I first started in my career, I asked about ethical finance. And I was mocked, laughed at, and said, that's for the tree huggers, for the hippies, and for the faithy guys to go speak to the Church of England. So it's lovely to see it's being mentioned everywhere now, which is just excellent, right? But what is actually happening? We are underpinning, seeing some kind of reset of capitalism. We're beginning to realize that the form of unchecked capitalism and free markets didn't actually operate the way we all thought they would operate, as proven out by many factors. The failure of trickle-down economics, the failure of the accounting and auditing system to actually price and put on the balance sheet the negative externalities and the nature and biodiversity implications of our activities. So now, for the first time, we've got this global conversation about rethinking economics, about GDP growth, about beyond growth, about the well-being economy, the circular economy, and so on and so forth. And of course, this gives a whole bunch of challenges. How do we go about doing this in the mainstream from, oh, wow, do you mean there's something beyond Friedman, profit maximization? Actually, really, is a company meant to do something beyond that? So we've got ourselves into this fascinating journey in the mainstream of trying to reshape and understand this. And this is coming with challenges, of course, with reporting, measuring, greenwashing, greenhushing. And of course, sustainability as an issue is now having to be tempered by two other factors since COVID and since the wars, the issues of security as well, and the issue of affordability. So that's the kind of broader perspective. So what is the kind of Islamic perspective on sustainable economy? Well, guess what? I'm not going to talk about that because you've got amazing experts here. Professor Mahomed and others have talked about this. Omar has written about this. The late Shaikh Yusuf Qaradawi has written about Islam and the environment. So it's fascinating. But what I think underpins it is the ontology of the purpose of wealth, of preordained wealth, rizq, accountability. And how does that all of a sudden play into creating a moral logic, or an Islamic moral logic, as Professor Mahomed refers to eloquently, versus this secular agnostic form of economics that we have today? Which, by the way, and this is my only claim to economics, is I grew up in Glasgow, the home of Adam Smith, where he was the first professor of moral philosophy and is, of course, the father of modern-day economics. But Smith himself, and it sounds better in a Scottish accent, but I won't do that. They won't understand what I'm saying, reconciles between his two great mentors, Hutcheson and Hume. One, a man of the cloth, who talks about human behavior being driven by innate goodness. And on the other side, David Hume, a man very perilous in those days in the Scottish Enlightenment to be challenging the church, to say, no, this is all about self-interest. So it's that reconciliation between the two. And where, for all of us who are finance practitioners, where does that come in? Well, you have to remember the role of finance in this whole conversation. Whilst we are talking about economics and the economy, finance has a unique role in that we allocate the energy across the economy. We decide which sectors, we have a disproportionate influence, I should say, on deciding and influencing where finance is allocated. And in that lies a particular responsibility as well. And let's not forget finance. This is our money. This is your money. Where does the finance come from? It's your bank deposits, it's your pensions, or indeed it's your governments who are printing debt, which you or your children are going to be paying. So let's never forget that this is actually our finance, our money. Of course, now, when you take Islamic sustainable finance, so I've explained to you sustainability, I've just dropped in the role of finance, and now in this worldwide tour, Islamic sustainable finance, all of a sudden, you start getting, yes, lovely literature, lovely, congruence on principles, but actually it's extremely jarring when you get down to the realities of it. And we know that the pioneers, like the late Sheikh Saleh Kamel and many others, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless their souls, they had to deal with this through a very pragmatic manner. You talk about equity-based, you talk about profit and loss sharing, you talk about the ban on interest, the ban on riba. Well, to develop that within a contemporary banking system has resulted in a very kind of jarring, problematic experience. Nonetheless, they have successfully managed to create the version of Islamic finance that we see today. And it's on that basis that we both commend that journey, that vision that they've had, but also reflect on where do we go next. And that's where you begin to see this narrative around maqasid and a project that we've pioneered in is halal to tayyib. We've specifically taken inspiration from the word tayyib, which is mentioned in Quran over 42 times, which is something which augments halal. Don't throw the baby away with the bathwater. You say, well done to what's been done and what's been created, but how can we augment that? How can we supplement that? And that's where at the UK Islamic Finance Council and GEFI, we've done a lot of R&D in this space, and earlier this year at COP28, we previewed the Tayyib-inspired platform, which is the Islamic Sustainable Investing Platform, which takes into consideration leading market ESG and sustainability factors and says, how can we integrate them into Islamic finance principles? Because if you had just stopped this conversation earlier this morning at the Islamic economic theory, all of you would have said, well, hold on a minute, Islamic finance should have already had the first SDG funds. It did not have the first SDG funds. It should already have had the first net zero products. It did not have the first net zero products. It should have huge reporting and disclosure on modern slavery and human trafficking on every single thing every Islamic bank and every sukuk finances. But no surprise, it doesn't. So what's the disconnect here? And what can we do to encourage a movement in a particular direction? So that's the essence of the Project Tayyib. See how we can empower growth, how we can encourage innovation and enhance choice for existing Islamic finance consumers, but also, let's be very frank about this. I'm a practitioner, I'm in the business world. 3.7, now as you mentioned, 3.74 trillion in global Islamic finance. Funds under responsible investment strategies following fund outflows in responsible investing is around 35 trillion. So I think you can do the sums yourself if you're in the world of business. What does that mean? It means faith-inspired ethical finance can actually contribute to the global conversation on sustainable finance. The SDGs, we were in Rome with His Holiness and others, they did not actually, it was the very last minute that they actually consulted the faith groups when they were creating their SDGs. There's no SDG for spirituality. 17 SDGs, 169 targets that underpin those goals. Actually, where's faith in that? And where's the conversation of faith in that as well? So we actually feel Islamic finance, and by extension the other faith groups, by bringing an ontology, a philosophical framework, you can actually start to navigate and overcome some of the challenges that we see in mainstream sustainability, which include things like a tobacco company having a higher sustainability rating than Tesla, than an EV manufacturer. So we see there's a huge opportunity, the definition of well-being. These are not things us as financiers are great at. You ask us to do anything in the qualitative space, we really struggle. We're great at quants. Indeed, we got the rocket scientists in that drove us to lovely securitized CDOs. But when it comes to qualitative components, measuring well-being, measuring happiness, measuring these components, it's not something that financiers are traditionally very well trained in. So actually, the faith groups have a fantastic role. The Sharia scholars, the imams, the community leaders have a fantastic role in actually contributing to helping us to understand and define that. And that's across all the faith. There are tension points, of course, between the E, the S, and the G, and there are 95% congruence with the SDGs. We've written a number of reports on this. There's probably 5% disagreements, but I think there's a fascinating opportunity for Islamic finance to look at this. And I'll just conclude with 3 things on that, and apologies, I'm a minute over. I love the name of this forum, AlBaraka Summits. For the last 20 years in Islamic finance, I've always asked a question, how can you put barakah into an Excel sheet? So if you've ever had to do a DCF or a calculator, how do you put barakah into that? So there is an actual belief beyond the profit maximization. There is a belief that we have. There is actually more, as Aristotle and indeed Adam Smith himself said, through temperance, there's more we can achieve. There's more satisfaction, there's more contentment. The pursuit of well-being is better achieved through temperance, restricting your wants and your needs, than the opposite, actually fueling your desires and so on. So I think there's some fascinating questions which we've highlighted in the Tayyib project, which I think are worthy of a lot more analysis by the professors, the academics, and the Sharia scholars to really unpack and to measure some of this. Apologies I overran, so back to you.
Thank you so much, Omar. This was very insightful. now so we've seen the research in a study that demonstrates that there is a very strong and clear alignment between Islamic principles and ESG. We have had one of the most, fastest introduction to the evolution of Islamic principles into mainstream. Literally amazing, and I'm sure a lot of us would want to have more detailed talks with you. Omar, thank you for giving us the context. And when there could be impact quantification mechanisms, why not in an Excel sheet we could demonstrate Baraka quantification mechanism as well into it. So there is hope there. So my background is, unfortunately for my sins, banking, and then impact investment, and then now ESG. When I was listening to all three of you, it was just like part of missing pieces of puzzles coming together. The world is facing the regulatory reforms. We have seen the SDGs are great, but they're being replaced by the regulators in forms of ESG. Why? Because they're mandatory reporting. And around 129 plus jurisdictions would become mandatory reporting by 2029. Now, keep that future in mind, because that would transform the net zero transition, which is encapsulating basically everything we are saying from the Islamic lens, as well as the more practiced lens of regulations. Where do you see the convergence? That's my number one question to all three of you. Where do you see the opportunity? And Islamic banks, Islamic financial services institutions, asset managers, bonds, do you think that they're ready to become part of this reporting structures that we're talking about? You spoke about lack of innovation. While we already had all the fundamentals intact, we never were able to launch the first net zero or climate-focused fund, and et cetera, although the cornerstone is very much there. But now they're all over the world. Where does the Islamic economy and principles play a part in creating that conversion intersection point? Are these two questions to each one of you. So let's start from you, Omar, because you're fresh from the
sure.
presentation.
So look, there's a whole bunch of regulation that's coming into the market from particularly Europe. Europe is leading
They're
this.
leading it.
There's a politicization of ESG in the US, so they're kind of a bit of pushback on bringing in regulation. Financial markets move from two things: compliance, regulation, or fundamental demand. It disproportionately moves from compliance, right? So when SFDR, I was in Paris just the other day, we were discussing this for the whole day, so when CSRD requirements, SFDR comes in, or in the UK it's SDR, it has supply chain implications. Massive supply chain. So every company that supplies into Europe, which is a huge market for the OIC and for the Global South, so be it palm oil through the EU reduction of emissions. Exactly. So all of these things will get impacted, full stop. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
End of story. So everyone has to begin to comply on reporting and disclosure and so on and so forth. But alongside that, if we take Pakistan, for example, they've got their environmental risk reporting, which the State Bank has come out with.
SEC is coming out with it.
That's right. You see the UAE Central Bank issued 2 bits of regulation just ahead of COP28 around climate risk reporting and Islamic sustainable finance, which was leading. Malaysia has already been very much proactive in this space with VBI, with SRI Sukuk, VBI Takaful, the Maqasid approach for capital markets. There's 2 types of regulation, voluntary and mandatory ones. So the mandatory ones, there is no choice. You will have to report under CSRD or whatever that is, right? Full stop.
But the question is, you mentioned Malaysia, and I agree with you, Malaysia is probably one of the most advanced ones, right, in terms of kind of creating the reporting structures. In Bursa as well, they've started that reporting. Pakistan is more reactive because exports are being curtailed and because of the climate-induced disasters that Pakistan is facing, so they have to kind of work despite their contribution is less. But in that mandatory reporting environment where more than 129 jurisdictions, where the trade and the FDI will be impacted by your reporting mechanism for investors and for businesses. Where is the opportunity? Don't you think, I mean, let's call spade a spade. Don't you think the pace of kind of moving in that direction while keeping the Islamic lenses on is very, very slow? Because there are so many different battles of conversions right now.
We think there's a huge opportunity, a massive opportunity. Actually,
Right.
we at the UKIC have estimated nearly $250 billion opportunity in the intersection between sustainability and Islamic finance.
Yeah.
You see green and sustainable sukuk.
Yeah.
That market last year issued over 10 billion. We surpassed that already this year. We're not even a full year yet. The demand appetite for a green and sustainable sukuk compared to a conventional sukuk
is more.
Right, is more. Right? So we see a huge market opportunity in that space. We see the opportunity for Islamic asset managers to tap into agnostic Western liquidity pools. So if you get this right, there's $30 trillion sitting there looking for what? Global South, emerging markets returns, right? And sustainable and ESG parameters. So if you can talk that language as the Islamic finance market,
that's the point.
all of a sudden you've got an opportunity to come out of your ecosystem,
Exactly.
which has been dominated by IOFI, 59, Tawaro, Commodity Murabba debates, all of this hoo-ha, right? Very important. Sorry, I shouldn't disregard it, but it's not seeing the bigger picture. And of course, at a baseline level, what is this all about? This is about profit and purpose.
Together, yeah.
So if these European rules, which are supplied by, say, factories in Bangladesh or Pakistan, have to now meet better worker conditions, then surely that's a win-win, right?
Interestingly, if you Google the most green factories in the world, Bangladesh comes on top.
Yeah, we all know why, because of the fast fashion consumption across Europe.
Yeah. Professor Ziyaad.
I can give you some, just practical example from Malaysia and countries that I've been working in particular. So we started this journey in 2016, the value-based intermediation journey, and we had began to draft that value-based intermediation, which was an integration and the convergence of Islamic with conventional. That was when we started to do that. Now, I remember we spent a year, I led the Sharia part of it, and we spent a year just finding exactly what that convergence is and how we can contribute to the broader market. Finally, VBI was launched in 2017, and with much fanfare, but it had 4 pillars, and those 4 pillars emerged as a convergence between what conventional will look at as progress in sustainability and what Islamic would underpin as the core criteria. That, entrepreneurial spirit and good conduct, etc. And then fast forward to 2022, we then drafted the value-based intermediation for takaful. And that was launched. But that was a lot more in-depth than the original VBI because of all the learnings. Now, there are some challenges. And now 2024, and we run training programs for banks doing sustainability reporting. And we find that although they may have been able to converge ESG criteria with Islamic ethos within the reporting standards, there just may be a little bit of over-reporting now. So we have a lot of green shine taking place because at this stage, you have one Islamic bank producing five sustainability reports, one being an environmental report, another, all within the sustainability report, but all separate dimensions. It goes to a marketing agency, it gets polished, and it gets pushed forward, and the real impact is lost in that data. So whilst there is a lot of effort around the reporting, there is this other side of it which can be quite nasty. And that means that we are doing a lot of greenwashing and green shining.
Oh, that's happening.
Simply, to look good. But when we dig deep, then we have to look at the real data. And I'll end off with this. You've got a major Islamic bank in Malaysia that reports, for example, that this year we've positively impacted 100,000 people, individuals that were in need of finance, and those that couldn't traditionally get it, but we were able to provide them with some social finance. And they make it as a large, in big font and in their report. Another bank in the West, and I won't name the bank, has a big report with fine print saying we supported 10 million individuals in social impact financing. And in fact, what we've done is we've appointed a chief social finance officer, not sustainability officer, social finance officer, and this is a conventional bank. So I think that Islamic banks really do need to start, playing the game on the ethics side. For too long, it's been a mantra that whatever is Islamic is ethical, but whatever is ethical is not necessarily Islamic. Right now, it seems to be that Islamic may be being left behind if it does not embrace the requirements of sustainability, ESG, etc., and integrate it within its corporate value intent. If it doesn't do that, then it's going to be very much like a traditional financial system.
Thank you. This is very, very useful. Professor Paolo.
Okay, well, I think that now Islamic finance has a great opportunity because it's already ready for the SDGs. But we need one thing. I know that it's a point of view, but we need to change the name.
Okay.
We do not call anymore Islamic finance.
What shall we call it?
I don't know exactly, but
and why do we need to change the name, you think?
I tell you from a non-Islamic country. When I started to teach Islamic finance many years ago, everybody, also the newspaper, say Islamic finance under Mola Antonelliana is the building, the most important building in my city. What we are doing here, we are Islamizing all the system. So if we change the name, not only about Islamic finance, but also about the contract, I think that Islamic finance can rise in terms of...
So it's the narrative and the awareness of it that needs to kind of be approached in a different way that actually can create that value proposition in the mindsets of the consumers.
Exactly.
Okay. Ibrahim, are you here? I cannot see you. How long do we have? Because my partners are going to ask a lot of questions now. Okay. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Okay, so the screen tells...
all right.
The screen tells 8 minutes.
8 minutes, so we can actually easily get 15 minutes.
I'm not sure.
We've got some very good questions coming in. Mike, please.
Yeah, I have a question. Hi, thank you. Just for the last comment, I really struggle with the idea that we need to change because the Islamophobia is that rife across the globe. There is something about us reclaiming that actually Islam is ethical. We've been doing this for years. We've been pandering to changing, to fitting in. But why should we fit in when we just belong?
Oh, beautiful. Well said.
Got one here.
There's a gentleman over there.
There's one there as well. Yeah.
Okay, there's over there.
Hi, my name is Akmal. I work for family office, and we have a couple of Sharia-compliant investments in Central Asia and West Africa. I've been just 2 days ago in event that's called Global Impact Investment Network. It's one of the biggest events in Amsterdam. It was amazing. And there were all the banks, development banks, conventional banks, all of them who are investing within sustainability. And as UN's SDG goals became kind of priority for all these banks, they are trying to align their investments within these SDG goals. However, I haven't seen any projects. There were lots of projects as well, banks that were showing their creative deal flows and more secure to get investments. But I haven't seen Sharia-compliant kind of financial inclusion within these projects. How can we convince UN to put 18th goal as a Sharia-compliant financial inclusivity? Because we have 2 billion of population are Muslim.
So your question is that how can we include Sharia finance into UN principles?
Yes, SDG goals.
SDG goals.
Because there is no poverty, no economic growth, such kind of...
I would let my panel to actually answer that, but in Dino's speech, if you saw that all the SDG principles are actually, if you look at them, they're actually Islamic principles as well. But I would let my panel to kind of answer this.
The question, the thing is, all the conventional financiers, they don't understand what is Sharia compliant. They know if we explain and prove them that we are ethical and we fall within it, that'd be okay. But if there is no such kind of goal specific for them, they wouldn't invest in Sharia compliant. Okay. If there is 18th goal Sharia compliant, we would see more investments into Islamic countries and projects.
Thank you for your question.
How can we achieve that?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I think,
take that?
So look, just two very quick points in terms of the naming. The last time I actually did see Sheikh Saleh Kamel in Bahrain at a conference, he asked the question about naming as well. And he said, should we be calling it Abrahamic banking? Because the ban on riba was there 1,400 years before Islam. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was there, and for over 300 years in the Christian tradition. So to me, there's actually a big question for the Christian community to revisit why, during the Franciscan period, they managed to let go on this ban on interest. Because for 300 years, not usury, i.e. even 0.5% or 1%, it was banned in the Christian tradition. And all of our literature today, as you grow up in Britain, you read Macbeth, Shakespeare, the Jubilee concept, all of these things are highly influenced by this issue. So I think there's definitely something in there through not an us and them lens, but through a shared values, common humanity lens. And we did something called the Edinburgh Finance Declaration, which was the world's first joint venture between Islamic finance and the church, working with the Archbishop Justin Welby, Rabbi Naftali Brower, Sir Trevor Chin, and others to identify those shared values. And if there's one thing in the world, absolutely no more of this fitting in and complying. Proud of your identities, all of us, our varied identities, but we have a lot more in common than that which separates us. And if we don't focus on our shared values, the world in this deglobalized phase is going to a very bad us and them. Regarding Jinn actually were part of the team, the advisory team that did Project Tayyib with us. There's now roughly $1.5 trillion in impact investing from nearly 3,000 funds. What impact investing is saying is not what you're against, but it's what you're for. And because Islamic finance started from a position of negative screening, which is why you can't have a tobacco company higher rating than a Tesla, right? And the legal Sharia principles, the qawaid of doing no harm, takes precedence over trying to achieve a potential good. And by the way, you should not undermine do no harm. I know the impact investors like to say, well, that's easy, we've got to move beyond that. No, you've got to move alongside that. Do no harm has to be critical. That's where regulation comes in. It raises the minimum bar to get rid of greenwashing and so on and so forth. So that's where there's a disconnect in Islamic finance. Not the SDGs. SDGs are just measures. And by the way, if you ever tried to create a financial product using the SDGs, of the 169 targets that underpin them, less than a third are actually relevant to an investment philosophy. They're typically for a government or a development agency to look at. So a third to maybe 45% max. So that's where I think that answers your question, hopefully. Islamic finance can and should do, through the concept of tayyib, not just do no harm, which is halal, but also inspire to do positive impact, which is intentionality rooted at its essence.
Thank you, Omar. Next question, yours?
Yeah, thank you very much. We have set up a think tank in Islamabad to make a comparison between international treaties and the Quranic injunctions and the framework. And the idea is to create a synergy, because whatever has been talked about by the honorable panelist. And I would like to ask what specific steps are being taken in terms of studies or undertaking in this area. Because when we talk about Maqasid-e-Sharia, for example, in Dr. Ziyaad's presentation, then Maqasid-e-Sharia's link with international treaties is so integral and so seamless that it needs to be highlighted. Or when we talk of entrepreneurs' covenant that Allah has with each entrepreneur, that he has to uphold the contracts, he has to uphold the treaties, he has to uphold the standards, the professional standards wherever you are, whichever jurisdiction you're working on. You have to uphold them. For that, you will be granted a reward in the jurisdiction hereafter. The emphasis of this covenant that Allah in the Quran has with each and every entrepreneur is so significant, and it ties up with the regulatory environment of any domestic or international environment. So if there is an obligation to report, then there is an obligation to report. We have undertaken that by virtue of the state, by virtue of an individual. We have to also uphold the covenant of the legislature. The legislative covenant is, after all, within the definition of Misaq. So which means that if there is a law that we voluntarily are subject to, we have to implement that.
Sir, your question, what's
and
your
finally,
question?
the tayyib thing. If I may also request that tayyib is a remarkable phrase in which if some studies are undertaken by your setup, because entire UN Convention on Corruption, FATF, all this are absolutely, and that definition, tayyib, halal, define what is lawful, what is unlawful. So the sin of yesterday is today an offense. So I think highlighting this aspect could lift off.
So your question?
My question was that if these studies are undertaken by various setups that the honorable panels are there,
right,
these studies can highlight, and if there are some studies, if whichever stage they have arrived at, it will be good if they could be shared with the audience.
Well, yeah, you know, the big challenge with Islamic economic research is that whilst it had been quite successful, you know, in the 30s, then in the 50s and 60s, and then in the early 2000s, the type of Islamic economic research today is quite limited in that field. And primarily because you've got an Islamic finance train which has a profit-driven motive, so therefore research around that is, you know, a lot more profitable. And that seems to be the fact. But in researching this paper, I had to go back to papers written 25 years ago and then 60 years ago. And that's where you see that a lot of this has already been done. It's just that we've missed that. Now, perhaps think tanks like yours and other research centers, of course, we do it at INCEIF University, where we have a center of excellence for Islamic economics, dedicated. And we realize Islamic finance is a branch of Islamic economics, and therefore the teachings, broader teachings that have been documented need to be analyzed further, looking at moral economy in particular, behavioral traits, value systems, to actually create this broader ecosystem. And if we don't do that, then we're going to be developing, as I said, in a fragmented kind of way. So agreed, the research is already being done, and we can share that with you.
Thank you so much. Although there are a lot of questions, but this gentleman and this timer both are not allowing me to actually continue.
For us.
But I think we have got our panelists in the room, and I'm sure you'll get the opportunity to ask more questions and create deliberations. I think let's give the panelists a really big applause for this really insightful